Hi, I'm DJ Ware. On this episode of the Cyber Gizmo, I'm going to be looking at Teleport, a promise that I made to you a week ago, and I'm going to fulfill that right after this. The thing to think about Teleport, it's a new way to think about connectivity because it's encompassing everything in the enterprise. So Teleport is an open source certificate authority, and it also includes something that Teleport refers to as the access plane. So what is this access plane? Access plane allows users to access all kinds of services such as secured shell, Kubernetes, web applications, databases, desktops, and it'll do all that even if they're behind a NAT. The access plane can also optionally offer limited time certificates, which you may choose to expire after 8 to 12 hours. So each day the user has to go and get a new certificate. That helps to alleviate some of the problems that you have with did this contractor leave? Are they still here? Is that user still a member of the organization or not? What can you actually do with Teleport? What does it actually do? So with Teleport, you can set up single sign-on, and you can have one place to access your servers, your Kubernetes, your databases, your desktops, and your web apps. So you can use your favorite programming language too to define access policies to your infrastructure. So you can tailor it. You can add on to it. You can also share and record interactive sessions across all environments. So let's say you have two developers that are working on a project, or maybe more than that you need for them to be able to collaborate. So you can have them share the same, let's say, SSH session, or maybe a Microsoft Teams session, allow them to work together. So, it's probably silly to do that through Teams, but it isn't so silly to use it for SSH. Also, if you're in a help desk situation and you're trying to find out what a user is really having problems with, you can use Teleport to access their desktop, with their permission, of course, to be able to access that part of it. But all of this hinges around something called identity management. So identity access management, or IAM, is I guess I should start with a story before going into all this about what the early days were like when single sign-on was first coming into vogue. So we called it auth and auth back then, or authenticate and authorize. And the methods of managing a user identity were primitive and somewhat cumbersome. They were complicated and basically just unpleasant to work with and to use it. So one side of the things is if we were pioneering the highway, if we tightened things up too much, all we did was generate calls to the help desk. And if we loosened it up too much, all we did was generate complaints from the security organization that was going, what the heck are you guys doing? So yeah, there was also it was prototypical of most of the solutions that were required to be able to have multiple proprietary solutions to build up your identity access management solution. A lot of them didn't come from the same company. They didn't integrate well with each other. And then you had to find, okay, so what was going to be the truth of your organization? You're really trying to say, how do I know that I am the person I'm claiming to be? What is my bona fides, if you will, about claiming that I'm a member of this organization? What proves it? In the early days, it was HR systems that provided that role. So we spent long hours trying to do workarounds to transform HR data into a common base, because some of them, I remember some of them even came from spreadsheets. This is a list of people in the organization. It's just a spreadsheet. So you had to extract those data from that, put it in a format that was standard. And let me tell you something about transformation. And you may disagree with this, but this is a long history of working with transformation. It's a waste of time. It does nothing for the organization, and the effort that you put into it is cost total. it doesn't have any benefit for the organization as a whole, because if it was integrated to begin with and had some standard that it applied, you wouldn't have to go through all this transformation things anyway. So we had to get the identities into a particular format, then pass those along to some key generation app, and then push that into a federation management application so that I could be able to, have these users available throughout not only my organization, but maybe someone else's organization, maybe a business-to-business partner, or maybe Salesforce or contractors. Yeah, there was just a lot of things you had to worry about. So, and finally, we had to move it onto an authorization server, such as LDAP, or maybe even just the operating system itself. So you can imagine that these baling wire and bubblegum solutions, they often broke down. It was data sensitive, and something that came in that you weren't planning for would just take the system out. Or it wouldn't allow the data to pass because it would stop on an error or some other nonsense. So, and forget about controlling access based on job functions. I mean, we had a hard enough time just getting the user IDs to agree from one system to another. I remember even within one company where we had two different enclaves in the system, where we had user identities that were generated by a policy that one particular company, and see, this would be like a large enterprise organization that had multiple companies under it. So in one case, they had a standard for it had to be first initial, last name. Another one had last name, first initial, middle initial. And so trying to get the user identities to even match up so that when you did generate the single sign-on request, that you were able to get the appropriate ID and then send it. So it's just, it was nasty. So forget about role-based access controls, because you couldn't even identify job functions in some standard way. A lot of times these fields that they use for job description was just a text field, and you cannot believe what you would find in some of them. So it was pretty much a nightmare. So today, though, we have kind of standards that we can use to apply to identity access management to a degree. I mean, I'm not saying that you're not going to run into these problems. Most likely you still will, but at least we have an ability today that we have user identity stores that provide single sign-on access, and there's a number of third parties that manage that for you. So Google does it, Okta does it, although Okta I know has a current deficiency in security right now, but they're working on. There's others, like you could even use GitHub for developers if you wanted to as well. So, but there has to be some way of provisioning the user account based on a system of truth. So then you would then pass it off to a credential management system that would then generate your authentication and authorization, that would handle your authorization and authentication requests. The identity governance, how do you get rid of users? How do you add them into the system? What kind of reporting and auditing steps do you have? And finally, you get it over to operations where things actually can happen, right? You allow the user to log in. Those are some of the things that Teleport is attempting to address. So they're looking at this as an architecture for the cloud. It also encompasses edge networks and private networks as well. So you can have users that are part of your organization. They could be external. They could be contractors. They could be business-to-business partners. They might even be customers that you allow access to certain parts of your system. So, for support reasons or whatever. But they have support for access for SSH nodes. They also allow Kubernetes cluster access, databases, web applications, and desktop access as well. And that includes not just Windows, but also Mac OS and Linux as well. So how does this actually work? What is my user experience? There is some issues with having all of your access go through a web application or a web portal. And so Teleport realizes that could be a concern. So they offer a number of ways of accessing their proxy. So you can go through, a web access point. You can go through Kubernetes Cuddle or kubectl. You can go through their application that replaces SSH called T-Shell, and those are installed on the client, and you can also have your database clients access the teleport proxy as well. The teleport proxy, in turn, manages access to the systems via the teleport authority. So that has your certificate authority and your audit logs in it, so that when user request comes in, there's a record of who went to where and what they were trying to do. That generates a single sign-on with whoever is your identity manager. Now, they do support a number of identity management systems. There's a list on their site. And finally, at the bottom, there's a number of applications that you can access as well, as you can see, from SSH, Windows, Kubernetes, MySQL, pSQL, MongoDB, Jenkins, and Grafana, just some examples. But the proxy will then generate a certificate back to the developer and then permit the next step, which is to actually send that certificate back to the user. That creates the authentication record, which then has a time to live. Now, that time to live could be 7 to 12 hours. It might be 8 to 12. It might be a day. It might be 2 days. Whatever it is your policy and your organization permits that authentication to be. But they're temporary certificates. They're not permanent. You're allowed access. So as you can see, the user node is going through the proxy. The proxy is actually setting up the connection request to the endpoint node. And that can be, like I said, it appears as a web list on the portal, or at T-Shell you can put in the actual name of the server and it will go ahead and attempt to make that connection if it's defined. And then the audit log contains a full record of that entire session, including the keystrokes that are passed and the responses from the server. So since we're talking about the audit log a little bit, that sits between the node, the authorization service, and then it provides either storage on the local file system, or you can put it into the cloud. So one of the things that you can do with the audit log, of course, is, like I said, you can have it replay the session. So this is an example. These are just text files. It's not a video file or anything like that, but you can play them back and it'll actually show you everything that user did from the time that the login was created until that user signs off. So if there was problems or you suspect foul play on one of your systems, this would help you identify which user was responsible. So I guess probably the last thing here is to talk about this. I find that, this is an open source product. You can use it for free. There is also a version for enterprise for licensing if you want support. There's also additional features, of course, that are offered in the commercial version, but you'll find all the things we talked about today in the free version as well, but there are some additional things that it applies for you. So the other thing you'll notice that on this picture here is you'll notice that there's two-factor. Yes, Teleport on the web application does require two-factor authentication to access your identity. So you can log in with a user ID and a password, but then you have this block for a two-factor that satisfies the need for, I have something I know and there is something I have. I'm going to leave you some links down below that allows you to go and explore the system for yourself. I'll also give you some links, some other YouTubers that have actually gone through and shown how to set it up and run through it. It's not difficult to do it, but there are some things that you'll have to be aware of. Most of the time, I've noticed that some of the YouTubers are recommending, install the proxy out in the cloud if you are intending to access your systems remotely, but you do not have to do that. You can access the proxy host internally as well. And of course, it does have the ability, the way it gets around NAT situations is it has the ability for you to define that SSH session as a reverse. So the proxy will actually send you the stream out to you. So yeah, you can do this in reverse. You can generate a reverse connection to the host. That will get you by your proxy connections as well as it may also bypass some firewall blocks in the system, which some of that I'm a little wary of because doing reverse connections is exactly how a bad actor would try to gain access to your system, and then from there try to attempt to get to a shell prompt and then escalate privileges into your system. So that part of it, yeah, I'm not too certain about. I have another one I want to look at too. There's some alternatives to teleport, but they're not as complete of a solution as this. One of the things that I'll also leave you is there were 2 articles that were the reason for why teleport exists and some of the thinking behind it and where it came from. There was a paper written in 2003, I forget the author, but it had to deal with some of the deficiencies in the secured shell protocol. The second paper in 2017 was, it's great to bring up problems and all that, but, I've always been taught that if you're going to bring a problem to somebody, you better have some ideas on what you might do to solve it. And so a paper written by Sean Cavanaugh in 2017 addressed some of the features that could be integrated into the system to allow something like a web-based application to generate the keys, to send them out to the keys, and then it in turn acts as the proxy to access the systems, provide audit logs, and so forth. So yeah, I'll put links for those if you want to read some of the background on what's going on here and why Teleport has chosen the architecture that they have. And it looks to me like, I don't know whether that paper was a guide for them, but it certainly is pretty close if you're looking at it. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, like and subscribe. See you next time. Bye for now.